Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar covering the revision of NSF award terms and conditions, which implement the revised 2 CFR. Before we begin, we'd like to take a poll to find out more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll, so you want to make sure you're viewing this presentation from the Zoom application. If you have any questions during this webinar, please submit them using the Q&A function. Please keep in mind that we have a lot of individuals attending this session, so we may not be able to answer all your questions. I also want to emphasize that we will be taking questions related to today's topic. The session is being recorded and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com. We will send you an email announcement as soon as the session has been posted. If you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please let us know in the Q&A and someone will assist you. Thank you for participating in our poll. And I am now pleased to turn it over to Jean Feldman, who is head of the policy office at NSF.
Thank you, Jeremy, and welcome everyone. This is really exciting for us to be able to provide this information to you today. This presentation is for both the NSF recipient community, those receiving the NSF awards, as well as NSF staff also are dialing in as part of today's presentation. So what are we really trying to focus on, and what do we want you to leave with from this presentation? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about our implementation process for 2 CFR, because it is quite different than that we have used over the last number of years. And so we want to explain that, and we want you to leave understanding what this process is and what the impact is going to be on all of you. Then we're going to walk through some of the changes, not all of them, that we've made to implement 2 CFR, and then finally, hopefully, have some time to take any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. Well, as Jeremy has already mentioned, my name's Jean Feldman. I'm head of the policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support in the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. I am joined by a number of staff members that are going to make sure that we get as many of your questions answered as we can. But we do want to reiterate the focus of this presentation is on the terms and conditions, and those are the questions that we really need to focus on this afternoon. So next slide. So now let's get into actually the overall background, which I am hoping sincerely that you all are aware of. So the Office of Management and Budget in April issued guidance to federal agencies to they posted in the Federal Register a revised draft 2 CFR, revised 2 CFR, and in subsequent guidance to the federal agencies, they made it very clear that our implementation had to be in new awards made on or after October 1st, 2024. Per NSF standard business process, we will, based on the issuance of these new terms and conditions available on our website now, we'll start referencing these in new awards as well as funding amendments on existing awards that are made on or after October 1st, 2024. So the Council on Federal Financial Assistance has a website, which is really very, very useful and has a lot of really good information that can be used to train your staff on what the major changes to 2 CFR 200 are. And so we do want to point that out to you as something that you want to focus on. Now we can move to the next slide. So when we revise when we implement 2 CFR, the entire suite of 2 CFR. It's not just one set of terms and conditions. Rather, for the foundation, it's a whole series of set of terms and conditions that are actually have to be revised per this implementation. So on this slide, you do see this listing of what it took to implement the new 2 CFR in our terms and conditions. Our grant general conditions, our cooperative agreement, financial and administrative terms and conditions. We have MODs and SUPs for the major multi-user research facility projects and federally funded research and development centers. We have MODs and SUPs for mid-scale research infrastructure projects. We have special terms and conditions that are applied to our conference and travel grants, FL26. And then in shaded are 3 additional sets of terms and conditions. Those that are shaded have not yet been posted to the website and are in process. And those are our small business innovation research, small business technology transfer terms and conditions, our international research terms and conditions, as well as our special terms and conditions for the conference or travel made to international organizations. Next slide, please. Now you will notice that on the last slide, I did not have something that is all near and dear to many of you, and that's called the research terms and conditions. And so when we received this guidance from OMB to implement by October 1st, that really isn't until October 1st, because as a customer service strategy, NSF always puts our documents out earlier than the implementation date so that you have an opportunity to figure out what we did. What changes did we make? What changes need to be made to your internal policies and procedures? What training do you need to do? And so we realized that putting something out in April and having it effective means that having an interagency implementation, which is what the research terms and conditions are, is virtually impossible. And so if you're really going to do a good job with it, having weekly meetings during the summer, there just was not sufficient time for us to do this. So NSF had to explore what alternative approach we could use to fully implement this. And so what we have opted to do is take our grant general conditions and make them applicable to all recipients of NSF grants, including institutions of higher education, nonprofit, non-academic organizations, for-profit organizations, and these are for-profits other than our SBIR or STTR recipients, state and local governments, and tribal governments. So this means that for those in the university and nonprofit community, this will be a change because you are for many years used to seeing the research terms and conditions. So what's going to happen with the research terms and conditions page? Well, effectively, beginning on October 1st, 2024, the RTCs will no longer be referenced in awards. What you will be seeing in lieu of that is either the grant general conditions, if it's a grant, or cooperative, the CAFATC, if it is a cooperative agreement. And so we want to make that fundamental point because there continue to be, I met with a big research administration association last week, and they were still wondering how we were going to make this happen. So what will happen is that particular page on the NSF website will remain out there because we know for some time there will be a large number of awards that the research terms and conditions will continue to apply to. However, no new awards will be made using those terms and conditions either for NSF or for any other federal agency. And so we will make a clear banner on the top of that page to make that really very, very clear. So another way that we are going to implement this document is to make a statement that in the case of any inconsistency between the coverage contained in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide and 2 CFR, including 2 CFR 200, the coverage specified in 2 CFR applies. Why are we doing that? NSF has traditionally implemented 2 CFR in 2 ways. The first way is in our Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, and NSF is the only federal agency that has received approval from OMB to implement our 2 CFR requirements via a policy document rather than a regulation. So we use the PAP Guide. In addition, we used the terms and conditions. So those 2 documents or sets of documents are how we implement 2 CFR. Unfortunately, we were able to make the terms and conditions transition, as I've just mentioned, effective October 1st. They will be referencing an updated set of terms and conditions to implement these documents. What we could not do and what we could not make happen is that we are unable, given the amount of time, we just issued a PAP Guide, folks. The PAP Guide 24-1 just went into effect on proposals submitted or due on or after May 20, 2024. So it's simply not possible for us to implement these changes immediately in the PAP Guide. Next slide, please. So what's going to happen to ensure folks understand, again, you're going to read the award terms and conditions, and they all have been modified for consistency, and I'm going to talk about those changes in a moment. However, again, as I mentioned, the PAP Guide will be unable to be revised at this time. We are talking a different time frame for implementation of the 2 CFR in the PAP Guide. So we will be putting, it now appears in this first bullet on each of the NSF program pages. NSF Financial Assistance Awards, Grants, and Cooperative Agreements made on or after October 1st, 2024 will be subject to the applicable set of award terms and conditions dated October 1st, 2024, available on the NSF website. These terms and conditions are consistent with the revised guidance specified in the OMB guidance for federal financial assistance published in the Federal Register on April 22nd, 2024. In the PAP Guide itself, as a header in every single chapter of the PAP Guide, NSF 24-1, the one you are currently using to prepare and submit your proposals, there will be in the header the following statement. In the case of any inconsistency between the coverage contained in the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide and 2 CFR, the coverage specified in 2 CFR applies. So yes, before we start getting questions about, I'm opening up the PAP Guide now and I see a 10% de minimis rate, that is, of course, going to happen until the PAP Guide is revised in 2025. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to change gears a bit, and I am going to talk about the actual sum of the actual changes that were made to the terms and conditions. And I'm going to focus on GC1, or the grant conditions, primarily because parallel changes, for the most part, are also made in the cooperative agreement financial and administrative terms and conditions. So we will be focusing for the rest part of this presentation on the grant general conditions. So I'd also like to point out that we spent, if you look at the actual set of terms and conditions themselves, we have a revision statement, which basically tries to explain what I went through in pretty significant detail, as well as a summary of changes. And I have to tell you, we spent a lot of time on that summary of changes, understanding that you all, for many of you, particularly institutions of higher education and research nonprofits, this is a new way of looking at the terms and conditions. So the first thing that we changed was in the recipient responsibilities and federal requirements. And so by adding all of you together, all recipient types in one set of terms and conditions, that has definite implications. So we make it very clear that unless we specify otherwise, the GC1 applies to all recipient types. However, once you have gone through this document, you will see a number that say this applies to for-profit organizations only. This applies to institutions of higher education only. So the document applies to all recipient types unless we specify otherwise. So we want to make that clear. We have also updated the recipient responsibility where we talk about letting NSF know of certain kinds of changes, such as allegations of research misconduct, significant problems relating to the administrative or financial aspects. That language was always there. However, there was language added that talks about what happens when there is a significant development that occurs between project reporting due dates. And so we added a cross-reference there to make sure you understood those notification responsibilities. Project prior approval requirements. Now, there is in the prior approval term and condition a series of prior approval requirements that we just highlight. I'm going to talk about the prior approval matrix later in the presentation, but we went through and we highlight as part of this document the major kinds of prior approval requirements that we really want to make you aware of and remind you of, given their significance and how frequently they occur. Changes in objective or scope, change in PI or co-PI, long-term disengagement of the PI or co-PI, subawarding or transferring out part of an NSF award via a subaward. Those are the ones that occur most frequently. So the prior approval requirements literally summarize those for you and send you to the applicable section of the PAP guide. These parts have not changed and remain accurate in the PAP guide. What are the procedures you need to do to follow or to request prior approval from NSF for any of those requirements? In the specific subaward, in the past, we always would identify for you which of the terms and conditions would need to flow down in any subaward document. Given that the GC1 applies now to all recipient types, what we've done is replace that with language that identifies that it is a recipient's responsibility to identify the applicable terms and conditions that would apply in any subaward arrangement. And that becomes important when you go back to the statement that I just made, which says this applies, the GC1 applies to everyone unless we specify otherwise. So based on the type of organization that it is, it's going to be your responsibility to pick what terms and conditions are applicable in that subaward arrangement. We also moved around a little bit in the GC1 and tried to consolidate those prior approval requirements into one location of the document. And we hope that's more helpful to you. And you will literally, as a result of that, see them highlighted together: participant support costs, the costs for associated with rearrangement and reconversion costs. The things of that nature are all lumped together in that part of the document. Participant support costs. What we've done in participant support costs is update the definition of participant support costs that was modified in 2 CFR 200.1. And what is significantly different about the definition, and I'm going to read it to you because it is important. Participant support costs as defined in 2 CFR 200.1 are direct costs for items that support participants and their involvement in a federal award, such as stipends, you've heard that, subsistence allowances, you're aware of that, travel allowances, registration fees, a new category called temporary dependent care, and per diem paid directly to or on behalf of participants in connection with NSF-sponsored conference and training activities. So this is very, very important for you to understand that the change was made in this definition to reflect the new definition in 2 CFR. I would strongly recommend that prior to implementation of temporary dependent care, you put policies and procedures on how that's going to be handled at your institutions so that it's done on a consistent basis, because this is not a category of cost that was typically supported under research awards. So I just wanted to make that part clear as well. Next slide, please. Now we have on here a whole bunch of changes that we talk about in the equipment category. In reality, in the last set of terms and conditions, we, NSF, declared the property exempt, subject to certain conditions that we identified in the term and condition itself. There were changes made to 2 CFR that made a change in that approach necessary. And really, in reality, and let me emphasize this, and I'm going to emphasize it again, this fundamentally does not impact in any real way how equipment is treated. So what the new 2 CFR did was call out equipment that is exempt, and that truly means it's exempt. It's exempt from further requirements and obligations to the agency. And then there was a category that they identified as and called it out as conditional vesting, which if you're going to add requirements to it, which NSF does and has in the past, it's actually now conditionally vested equipment. And then there is the third category of federally owned property. So what did we do? We revised to specify that unless specifically identified in the award as exempt, meaning no strings attached, title to equipment purchased or fabricated under the award conditionally vests upon acquisition in the recipient for consistency with 2 CFR 200.313A. Unless NSF provides alternative disposition instructions no later than that 120 days, NSF grants, at that time, NSF grants the unconditional title to equipment in the recipient or subrecipient. We also reserve the right to transfer the title to the federal government or a third party at any time during the award. Or in the disposition instructions no later than 120 days. And then finally, the required inventory information for federally owned property has been updated for consistency with that 200.313. The bottom line here is that bullets 2 and 3 were always there anyway. We have added no new requirements. What the only thing we have done here, and I want to just make this clear, is that instead of exempt with conditions, it is now conditionally vested in the recipient, subject to the conditions that are identified in the term and conditions. So fundamentally, no real changes, but we did, because of the changes to 2 CFR 300, we really had to go through and make some changes to this section. Next slide, please. Allowable costs. Well, obviously, GC1 applied in the past to for-profits, state and locals, and tribals. So those are the cost principles that were called out as being applicable. Given what we've done and that we're combining GC1 into all recipient types, we have now added the applicable cost principle. We've referenced IHEs as well as nonprofit, non-academic organizations. Not a major change. Payments. This is one that I really would like to point out as not necessarily being 2 CFR 200 change related, but something that we have been identifying as a potential issue. And so we wanted to make it clear. So in the payment section, it talks about recipient requests for payments. And what we have done is identify that, except as noted in Chapter 8, PAP Guide Chapter 8C, the recipient is required to request payments electronically through the award cash management service. That part has not changed at all. Under ACMS, the recipient must provide award level detail at the time of the payment request. The language that is new states the recipient must, and that's a must, request payments in amounts necessary to meet their current needs pursuant to the timing of payments as defined in 200.305. We were seeing some very large drawdowns that made us question, maybe we should be more precise in our language about that the payments must be necessary to meet current needs pursuant to 200.305. Project reporting requirements. As I've already mentioned before, when I started, there is new language that addresses the significant developments that occur between project reporting due dates. And in addition, in multiple spots of this document, because the old 2 CFR referred to FAPIS, the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity System, it is now the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity in SAM.gov. And SAM.gov is where all of this information is now housed. So we had to make appropriate changes in terminology in multiple places in the terms and conditions to address that. We have also added a new term on responsible and ethical conduct of research. For those of you in the IHE community, this is not new. You've had to do this because of America Competes Act way back from 2009 for many years, but it wasn't in GC1. So we had to add this term and condition, and it will continue to apply only to institutions of higher education. Next slide, please. So reporting subawards and executive compensation, we are required per 2 CFR to include the term and condition identified in Appendix A to Part 170. We have done this in the past. This is not new. Changes, however, were made in Part 170 to that term and condition, so we simply cut and paste and replaced it so you can be assured that that term and condition is the latest version contained in 2 CFR. The same applies exactly to the System for Award Management, SAM.gov, and the Universal Identifier Requirements, the UEI. We are also required to have a term and condition that is verbatim from Appendix A to Part 25. That was modified slightly as well with this issuance of 2 CFR. So we've literally replaced one term with the other. There is a new term added to GC1 called Academic Technology Transfer and Commercialization of University Research. That was not there before because it, again, is one that applies only to institutions of higher education. So that is one where we have definitely added it. It's not new to the university community, but we wanted to absolutely make sure that you were aware that this was a new term in there. The next one that I'd like to talk about is the copyrighted material. A couple of changes that were made there. The term non-transferable has been deleted, and the royalty-free license rights language has been updated for consistency with the revised 2 CFR 200. Now, what is very important about this is that this particular language was changed in order to effectively implement the new public access requirements that came out of the Nelson Memorandum. NSF will not be implementing the Nelson Memorandum in this set of terms and conditions. Rather, we will be implementing it wholesale in the 2025 PAP Guide. Whenever we do a new PAP Guide, we do a new set of terms and conditions, so they will then sync up at that time. What is really important to point out to all of you is language that states that the recipient agrees that if it or anyone else does own copyright in a subject writing, the federal government will have a non-exclusive, irrevocable, royalty-free license right to use, reproduce, distribute to the public, perform publicly, prepare derivative works, and display publicly the subject writings in whole or in part and in any manner for federal purposes and to permit others to do so. So that is going to be the piece that will help us effectively in the 2025 PAP Guide implement our public access requirements. And other agencies are utilizing that particular language as well. Next slide, please. Program income. The full definition of program income has been incorporated for greater transparency. We find that that is often very, very helpful. The intangible property, similar to what you're going to see because of what we just did to copyrighted material, you're also going to see the same things here, but we're pointing out that we are linking to the NIST by Dole regulations, as well as the current interagency domestic manufacturing waiver form. And those have been added by NSF's new copyright attorney, new patent rights attorney. Very excited to have Meredith on board. And so that language has been modified as well. Audits and records language has been added from 200 to 237 regarding the right of access to records of the recipient and subrecipient pertinent to the federal award. That was in terms and conditions a number of years ago. It has disappeared, and we are making sure you're aware. I do believe that you are aware that the GAO, the agency, inspector generals can all come in and have that right to review and audit your records. Termination and enforcement. That language also was changed into CFR 200. And there are now 4 different rationales for termination: failure to comply with the terms and conditions of the award by NSF with the consent of the recipient, and in which case the 2 parties have to agree on the termination conditions; by the recipient upon sending NSF a written notification with the reasons for such termination. A 4th category, by NSF or by the agency if an award no longer effectuates the program goals or agency priorities. That's the new piece. NSF has always had a 5th condition, which says when ordered by the deputy director under NSF's regulation on research misconduct. So I think that is a really important set of language or conditions to just take a brief look at and make sure you understand the implications. Doesn't happen often at NSF, but we want to make you aware what our rights are as an agency and what your rights are as a recipient of NSF funds. In addition, not on one of these slides, but something that I looked over it and wanted to point out is that we have an article on non-discrimination that has been in place forever. But we did add this go around an additional reference that I would like to point out is there. And that's a reference to President Biden's Executive Order 14096 that is entitled Revitalizing Our Nation's Commitment to Environmental Justice for All. That was added, and I wanted to make sure you all were aware that it is there. Next slide, please. Whistleblower protection. There was a very brief statement on whistleblower protection. What we have done here is make it very clear in more detail what the overall requirements are and what the applicabilities are, and make sure that recipients are notified that they must inform their employees in writing of the rights and remedies under 41 U.S. Code 4712. So we felt like putting that additional language that addresses the overall requirements and the applicability was very important for your understanding. Build America, Buy America. The updates there were mainly to update references that have changed since the last implementation. We've added a new term and condition. For those of you who are institutions of higher education, you already know about this one. It is the Foreign Financial Disclosure Report, FFDR, CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. That already was a term and condition in the Research Terms and Conditions Agency specific requirements. But obviously, since it applies only to IHEs, it was not in GC1. So we have now pulled over that particular term and condition into these awards. The resolution of conflicting conditions. Now, I've already talked about one in the very beginning, but let me go into a little more detail here. So we have updated the conflicting conditions to specify that if GC1 is silent on a specific area covered by 2 CFR 200, including 2 CFR 200, including Part 200, 2 CFR applies. So if there is a disconnect, 2 CFR applies. A new provision's also been added, as I've mentioned before, about being a discrepancy between 2 CFR and the PAP guide. Let me reiterate it again. 2 CFR applies because we know that for the PAP guide, you're going to go and see the de minimis has not changed. The subaward thresholds have not changed. The property changes have not been made. 2 CFR in this context will apply. Next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to end with the fact that as part of both GC1 and what we did in the past for the research terms and conditions, there were a set of national policy requirements for recipients of NSF awards. And the national policy requirements had all of the agencies and all of the statutory, regulatory, and executive-based requirements. So what we have done to that is remove all of the other agencies' coverage. We've renamed it the National Policy Requirements for Recipients of NSF Awards. I'd like to give a big shout out to Will Grant and Eric Mulch in our Office of the General Counsel, who did an amazing job assisting us in updating of this of the National Policy Requirements document. That was a big lift, and we appreciate their help. The prior approval matrix. Now, the research terms and conditions had a prior approval matrix, and it was probably the most useful of the documents that came out of the RTCs. And so we wanted, and we used it before in the past in the GC1, but we updated it. We updated this document. Big shouts out to Samantha Hunter and Bess Strauser of the policy office, who worked very hard on this. But in lieu of having every other agencies, all you will have right now is the 2 CFR reference. If there is a reference within NSF, for example, a PAP guide reference, we note it there. And then we identify whether the requirement is required or whether it's waived. Both of these documents were updated to implement the new 2 CFR. Next slide, please. So we always end these presentations with a lot of reference materials, and we do so here. It's at this time that I'd like the opportunity to thank you for your time and attention, and to see if there are any questions that you all may have regarding what's been done here with the terms and conditions.
Thank you, Jean. Yes, and I want to thank my colleagues for answering a number of the questions in the Q&A. We did have some questions come in that we did not address because they were not related to this topic. So don't think we're ignoring you, but I guess a little bit. But we're just trying to focus on these questions that are related to terms and conditions. I wanted to get we answered this question in the Q&A, but I wanted to get it for everybody to hear because we saw it a number of times. And that is, Jean, if you could, again, kind of discuss the October 1 date and how the terms and conditions apply to new awards versus the existing awards. What should people really be aware of?
Okay, so you will see that obviously, easy, any new award made on or after October 1st will reference either very likely GC1 for grants or cooperative, the CAFATC for cooperative agreements. So then, if it's a funding amendment on an existing award, we have to give you the ability to have consideration, meaning we have to give you some form of compensation. So we always use that as an opportunity to change to a new set of terms and conditions. So if you are getting a continuing grant increment, if you are getting supplemental funding, you will see that a new set of terms and conditions has indeed been incorporated into that document. And that is what a recipient will be required to follow. There are some nuances there. For example, because we incorporate the entire 2 CFR into the GC1. So let's ask one of the biggest questions. I will ask and answer one of the biggest questions that's been received. And that has to do with equipment. So the equipment threshold, of course, changed in 2 CFR 200 from 5,000 to 10,000. So The question is, oh, great, we can start applying that now. The reality is that for equipment, and there was just a big meeting where Office of Naval Research and HHS rate negotiators were there. They will not be making changes to existing rate agreements. So you will be following your rate agreement, and it's with the next rate agreement that would change. So that is an example of a nuance here, that if there is something in your rate agreement, you would continue to follow that until you had a new rate agreement. That may get other questions. That may get other questions, but it was important to answer it.
Okay, next question. Let's see, where are we? Okay, so this goes to the research terms and conditions. So for other agencies that previously relied on the research terms and conditions, will each agency now have to have their own terms and conditions document like NSF has done today?
Yes, they're going to have their own. And in fact, I've spoken to, I think, all of them that use the research terms and conditions. And now, let me make it very clear that it does not necessarily mean that the terms and conditions are forever dead. It just means that at this time, we didn't have sufficient time to really put together an interagency set of requirements. But as of October 1st, those terms and conditions are essentially, except if you had a prior award made before October 1st, they're superseded by something else because they have not yet been updated per the requirements of OMB to have the terms and conditions reflect the new 2 CFR. So you would need to really, really be, if you have any questions whatsoever. Another thing that we will be putting on that page, research terms and conditions page, is a statement that if you have any questions, you should be reaching out to the agency in question to ensure, because NSF cannot answer them for the rest of the agencies. But I wanted to make that clear.
Okay, and then I also, related to that, I wanted to bring up the prior approval matrix because we did have, as most or a lot of people are aware, all the other agencies that were part of the RTCs in the prior approval matrix. How will that look going forward? Will other agencies at some point in the future be added to that matrix?
They will not be, because that was a research terms and conditions that was incorporated. The research terms and conditions included the national policy requirements, it included the prior approval requirements, and it included the flow down requirements. And so it's a package deal. So we will not be adding other agencies unless the decision is made at a later date to redevelop, update, if you will, the research terms and conditions. Agencies will need to rely on whatever that agency puts out in its place. So and again, as I mentioned when we were talking about it, I know the significant value that folks had with that particular document. They'd even print it out. Whenever I go out on travel, you'd see it tacked up to someone's because it was a one-stop shop. But unfortunately, right now, the document you saw has NSF references if applicable, and then waived or required. There will be no additional agencies added unless the decision was made to redo the research terms and conditions at a later date.
Great. The next question I wanted to ask is, how will these revised terms and conditions apply to no-cost extensions?
These terms and conditions you have an existing award. The new terms and conditions will only apply to funding amendments on existing awards. A no-cost extension is not a funding amendment. So the terms and conditions will not be modified when you are requesting a no-cost extension or an NSF-approved extension. It is only supplements and continuing grant increments. So you follow the existing terms and conditions in place with the original awards.
Okay, great. So next question, you talked about the revised guidance and the language surrounding childcare. I guess the question that we received, I think we saw it a couple of times, is can you confirm that this should be coded as participant support?
Absolutely, 100%. It has to be categorized as participant support. This is not for employee. The only one this is eligible, the only category. In fact, I have a very interesting story I could tell about us reaching out to OMB, and it was about actually childcare for employees. But the issue came up of participants, and NSF, as a result of those discussions with OMB changed the language for participants only. The only other location where childcare comes up is in the travel section, and that was not changed. It absolutely needs to be categorized as participant support costs, because that's all that's eligible are participants.
Okay, and then a follow-on to that would be, would there be any changes to it to the budget to reflect any new categories for participant support?
There will be, but unfortunately, because of how we do this, and that would actually be a PAP guide change, because we will have to include a new line item on the budget in the 2025 PAP guide and in the budget preparation instructions. So yes, it will, but you're going to have to be patient, because the new PAP guide for 2025 is the first and only availability of us to do that, because it must be changed in the PAP guide. And I think you all value the fact that NSF puts out that PAP guide for public comment for 60 days. We give you 90 days advance notice. It just takes time. So please be patient. It will be added, but it's going to be added at the time of the next PAP guide issuance.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question, we had a couple of these regarding the information on equipment.
Yes.
And the question was regarding the 120-day window for disposition of equipment. Will the recipient be notified by NSF, or will they need, regarding title, or will they need to contact NSF if that 120-day window has
right.
passed?
And the way the language reads, will call you. It says, unless NSF provides alternative instructions no later than 120 days after the end date, NSF grants unconditional title. So you will know. We will let you know if we're going to give alternative disposition instructions.
Great, thank you. I see. I'm still seeing questions that are policy related questions, and we would say if you have specific policy related questions, please contact either the Cognizant Grants Officer for your award, or if it's a general policy question, you can reach policy@nsf.gov, and my colleagues are going to hate me for saying that. We're going to get inundated with questions, so please be patient with us if you do send any questions to policy@nsf.gov.
Yeah, especially, can I just add that, especially after a big session like today, because invariably, whenever we do a big outreach session where we have over 3,000 people, we end up with a lot of questions. So please be patient. We really do our best to get you answers as soon as we possibly can.
The other thing I'd like to mention is that I did see a number of or a few questions or comments in the Q&A about summaries of the terms and conditions. What I would recommend you do is you go to the award conditions page and you look at the revised version, and we do provide a summary of the significant changes to this very document. So you can get that by going to it.
And most of everything I covered, almost verbatim, is on that summary of changes. So that's why we because we knew this would be new, especially to a different format, not really content so much as a different format for our IHEs. We did spend a lot of time. So that's a great point, Jeremy. Thanks for raising that.
And I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. Before we conclude, we want to take a quick survey so we can hear from you about today's session. We've put a link in the chat for you. Your feedback is always important to us, and we appreciate your responses. We read all of them. We make changes based on your suggestions, topic suggestions, and so forth. They'll help us shape future webinars like this one. So thank you all again for your participation, and we hope to see you soon.